Chosen one. Before this message goes any further, pause for a moment and ask yourself something honestly. Have you ever felt as if an entire group of people suddenly turned against you without a clear reason? Not just one person, not just a misunderstanding, but something larger, something strange, almost coordinated, as if friends, neighbors, co-workers, even relatives slowly began shifting their attitudes toward you at the same time. If that experience sounds familiar, then this message may explain more about your life than you realize. And if something in your spirit already feels stirred by these words, take a second right now to like the video and share in the comments where you're watching from. Because many chosen ones around the world are discovering that their story is not isolated at all. It follows a pattern that has appeared throughout spiritual history. The truth that many people do not want to acknowledge is that the chosen one rarely faces opposition from just a single enemy. More often, resistance comes from an entire environment that quietly begins to feel threatened by their presence. It may not start with loud accusations or open hostility. Instead, it begins subtly, almost invisibly, like a shift in the atmosphere around you. Conversations change when you enter the room. People who once supported you begin to distance themselves. Rumors circulate quietly through social circles, and before long, you begin to sense something disturbing. Individuals who barely know you suddenly hold opinions about you that were clearly planted by someone else. What begins as whispers slowly transforms into a collective narrative, and the chosen one may find themselves standing alone against what appears to be an entire community. In those moments, confusion can overwhelm even the strongest spirit. You may start asking yourself questions that no one else seems willing to answer. Why did so many people change their attitude toward me so suddenly? What did I do to deserve this hostility? Why are people believing stories that are not even true? The mind searches desperately for logical explanations because it is difficult to comprehend why so many individuals would align themselves against one person who simply tried to live honestly. Yet the deeper truth behind these situations is rarely about the accusations being made. It is about something far more unsettling for those who oppose the chosen one. Your presence itself disrupts the environment around you. Throughout scripture and spiritual history, individuals called by God often experienced this same mysterious pattern. Their lives exposed things others preferred to keep hidden. Their integrity created discomfort in environments built on compromise. Their refusal to participate in manipulation or corruption silently revealed the behavior of those who depended on such systems to maintain control. Without saying a word, the chosen one becomes a mirror, reflecting truths that many people would rather ignore. And instead of confronting their own actions, groups sometimes respond by attempting to remove the mirror entirely. The Bible quietly describes this phenomenon again and again. In the Gospel of John, Jesus warned his followers about the reaction truth often provokes in the world. If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. John 15:18. These words were not spoken as a threat, but as a revelation of a pattern. When truth enters environments built on deception, the first reaction is often hostility. Not because the truth has harmed anyone, but because it threatens systems people have grown comfortable protecting. The chosen one frequently becomes the target of that hostility, not because they attacked anyone, but because their presence exposes what others hoped would remain unseen. What makes this situation even more unsettling is how quietly collective opposition can begin. At first, it may involve only a few individuals who feel particularly threatened. Perhaps someone envies your character, your influence, or the quiet authority that seems to follow you. Maybe another person resents the fact that you refused to participate in behavior that everyone else accepted as normal. These individuals rarely begin their campaign openly. Instead, they plant seeds. A comment here, a suggestion there, a subtle story that frames you in a suspicious light. Over time, those seeds grow into assumptions, and assumptions grow into shared beliefs among people who never even asked for your side of the story. Soon, the chosen one realizes that they are no longer dealing with isolated misunderstandings. but with a narrative that is spread through the entire community. People who once greeted you warmly now look at you differently. Invitations stop coming. Conversations feel forced or distant. Some individuals may even begin treating you as though you have done something terrible, even though no one can clearly explain what that supposed wrongdoing actually was. It is one of the most disorienting experiences a person can face because it challenges your sense of belonging and identity at the same time. Many chosen ones reach a point where they begin questioning themselves. They replay past conversations in their mind, searching for mistakes they might have made. They wonder if they unintentionally offended someone or misunderstood a situation. The human instinct is to assume responsibility when conflict appears, especially when so many people seem convinced that you are the problem. Yet this is precisely the moment where spiritual clarity becomes essential. Because what you are experiencing may not be the result of wrongdoing at all. It may be the reaction that often follows when someone carries a calling others cannot understand. History reveals that those who walk closely with truth frequently stand alone before they are vindicated. Joseph experienced this long before he rose to leadership in Egypt. His own brothers misunderstood him so deeply that they sold him into slavery, convinced that eliminating him would solve the discomfort his presence created. Yet the very act intended to destroy Joseph eventually positioned him exactly where God needed him to be. Genesis reminds us of the divine reversal that followed when Joseph later told those same brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50:20. What appeared to be betrayal and humiliation became the pathway through which God revealed a larger purpose. The same pattern continues, appearing in the lives of many chosen ones today. Groups may unite with the intention of pushing you out, silencing you, or discrediting your character. They may believe that by working together, they can erase your influence or rewrite the narrative about who you are. But something remarkable often happens when opposition becomes collective. The very scale of the attack begins drawing attention to the truth. Observers start asking quiet questions. Why are so many people targeting one individual? Why does the story keep changing? Why does the person being accused remain calm while others grow increasingly aggressive? When hostility reaches that level, the situation begins transforming from a private conflict into a public revelation. What was meant to humiliate the chosen one gradually exposes the motivations behind the attack itself. In trying to destroy your reputation, some individuals unintentionally reveal their own character. Their exaggerations become visible. Their manipulation becomes obvious. Their insistence on controlling the narrative begins to unravel under the weight of its own contradictions. And suddenly, the same community that once seemed united against you begins noticing things they ignored before. This is why many spiritual teachers describe these moments as divine turning points rather than defeats. When many people unite against the chosen one, they often believe their numbers guarantee victory. Yet God does not measure outcomes the way human crowds do. In Scripture, we repeatedly see situations where a single individual, standing with truth, ultimately overcame entire groups aligned against them. David faced armies that appeared unstoppable, yet his victory came not from strength, but from faith. The prophet Isaiah described this divine protection when he wrote, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." Isaiah 54:17. These words are not simply poetic encouragement. They describe a spiritual law that has echoed through generations. For the chosen one watching this message right now, there is something important to understand. The moment when it feels like everyone has turned against you may actually be the beginning of a greater revelation rather than the end of your story. What appears to be collective rejection can become the stage where truth is finally exposed. The same attempt to isolate you can eventually demonstrate your integrity more clearly than any defense you could have spoken yourself. Because when false narratives collapse, they do not simply disappear quietly. They often reveal exactly who created them and why. So if you have experienced a season where it seemed as though an entire community aligned against you, do not assume that the story is over. In many spiritual journeys, that moment is precisely where the turning point begins. What others intended as destruction often becomes the public exposure of truth. The attempt to humiliate the chosen one ends up revealing something far more powerful: who you truly are and who they truly are. And as we continue through this message, you may begin recognizing that what felt like the darkest chapter of your life was actually the beginning of your vindication. Now here is the truth that many communities never say out loud, but every chosen one eventually experiences. The moment you walk into certain environments, something shifts that people cannot easily explain. It is not always something you say, and often it is not even something you intentionally do. It is simply the presence you carry. The mindset, the moral compass, and the spiritual awareness that guide your life are fundamentally different from the patterns that hold many groups together. And that difference alone can disturb an entire room. If you have ever walked into a space and felt the atmosphere change, if you have ever noticed people suddenly becoming defensive or uncomfortable around you, even though you remained calm and respectful, then you may already understand the phenomenon we are describing today. And if this message resonates with your experience, take a moment to comment the word truth below, because many chosen ones around the world are beginning to recognize that what once felt confusing was actually a spiritual pattern unfolding in their lives. Most communities operate through invisible agreements that are rarely spoken aloud, but are understood by everyone involved. These agreements shape the way people behave, the conversations they have, and the boundaries they never cross. They define what topics are safe to discuss and which truths must remain hidden. Over time, these unspoken rules become the glue that holds the group together. People learn what they are expected to laugh at, what they are expected to tolerate, and which behaviors must never be challenged if they wish to remain accepted within the circle. In many environments, these patterns include small compromises that gradually become normalized. Gossip about others, manipulation of circumstances for personal advantage, subtle dishonesty that everyone quietly overlooks because it benefits the group. The system works precisely because no one questions it. Then suddenly, someone enters that environment who does not naturally follow those patterns. The chosen one does not participate in gossip. The chosen one refuses to manipulate situations for advantage. The chosen one quietly chooses integrity, even when it would be easier to compromise. And at first, this difference may appear harmless, even admirable. But over time, something deeper begins happening within the group dynamic. Your refusal to participate exposes behaviors others had learned to ignore. Your calm integrity makes the group's compromises more visible. And what once felt comfortable within that environment suddenly feels unsettled, because the presence of one person walking in truth disrupts the illusion that everyone was living by the same moral standard. This is where the tension begins to form. It is not always about specific actions or disagreements. Often, it is about what your existence represents. When people are accustomed to operating within certain patterns, the presence of someone who refuses to conform becomes a silent challenge. Without saying a word, you are revealing that another way of living is possible. Without accusing anyone directly, your behavior highlights the difference between truth and compromise. And for individuals who have built their comfort around those compromises, that silent contrast can feel threatening. Scripture describes this dynamic with remarkable clarity. In the Gospel of John, Jesus explained why certain individuals react strongly when confronted by truth, saying, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." John 3:20. Notice the language used here. The hostility does not originate because the light attacked anyone. The hostility appears because the light reveals what people hoped would remain hidden. This principle has echoed throughout history whenever truth enters environments built on silence and denial. The chosen one often carries that light, sometimes without even realizing it. At this point, something subtle begins to happen within the group. Instead of examining their own behavior, individuals may begin shifting their focus toward the person who exposed the discomfort. It becomes psychologically easier to label the chosen one as the problem than to confront the reality that the environment itself may need change. Slowly, conversations begin forming around you, rather than around the behaviors that originally created the tension. Someone may describe you as judgmental simply because you chose not to participate in gossip. Another person might claim you think you are better than others because you refuse to follow certain patterns. These narratives grow quietly, fueled by insecurity rather than evidence. Over time, what started as discomfort becomes something larger. Individuals begin aligning their perspectives with one another. Small comments reinforce shared suspicion. Someone recalls a moment that can be interpreted negatively. Another adds an assumption that strengthens the story. Soon, a narrative begins forming within the group that explains the discomfort everyone felt. According to that narrative, the chosen one becomes the source of the problem. The presence that once quietly exposed truth is now framed as disruptive or dangerous to the unity of the group. Yet what many people fail to recognize is that the chosen one has not actually attacked anyone. In many cases, you simply existed with a different standard. You lived by principles that did not require deception, manipulation, or compromise, but that alone was enough to challenge the stability of an environment built on those very things. Your integrity acted as a mirror, reflecting behaviors others preferred not to see. And mirrors often become unwelcome when they reveal truths people hoped would remain hidden. This is why chosen ones throughout history have frequently experienced collective resistance, even when they acted with humility and kindness. The prophet Jeremiah was rejected by the very people he tried to guide. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers because the calling on his life made them uncomfortable. Even Jesus himself faced hostility from groups who felt threatened by the truth he represented. The pattern repeats because the underlying psychology remains the same. When people feel exposed by truth, they often attempt to remove the person who carries it, rather than confronting the truth itself. But here is the deeper revelation that many chosen ones discover later in their journey. The discomfort your presence created was not proof that you were wrong. In many cases, it was evidence that your life was revealing something important. Your refusal to compromise disrupted systems that depended on silence. Your integrity made certain behaviors impossible to ignore. And although the group may have responded with resistance, that resistance often reveals exactly how powerful truth can be. The book of Proverbs describes this reality in a simple yet profound statement. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Proverbs 11:3. Integrity does more than guide the life of the chosen one. It exposes the contradictions within environments that resist it. And when those contradictions become visible, people must eventually make a choice. They can confront the truth and change their behavior, or they can unite against the one who revealed it. Sadly, many groups choose the second path because it feels easier in the moment. Yet even when entire communities react this way, the story is far from finished. What appears to be rejection is often the beginning of a much larger process. The same mirror that made people uncomfortable will eventually reveal who acted with honesty and who acted from insecurity or fear. And as the journey continues, the chosen one begins to realize something profound. The reason your presence disturbed the group was never because you were dangerous. It was because the truth you carried could not remain hidden forever. What many chosen ones eventually realize, often after months or even years of confusion, is that collective opposition rarely begins with open hostility. It almost never starts with a public confrontation or a clear declaration of conflict. Instead, it begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the background of ordinary conversations. A whisper here, a subtle comment there, a suggestion planted in someone's mind that slowly begins shaping the way others see you. By the time the chosen one recognizes what is happening, the narrative may already have spread far enough that it feels as though an entire community suddenly turned against you overnight. But in reality, the process started long before that moment. And if you have experienced something like this in your own life, pause for a moment and write, "I see it now," in the comments below. Because recognizing the pattern is often the first step toward understanding what God is doing behind the scenes. The early stages of collective opposition are rarely dramatic. In fact, they are usually so subtle that the chosen one does not even realize they are happening. Someone may begin by questioning your intentions in a casual conversation. Another person may repeat a story about you that contains just enough distortion to change how it sounds. These small remarks do not appear dangerous on their own, but they plant seeds in the minds of those who hear them. Over time, those seeds begin shaping perception. People who once viewed you positively start interpreting your actions through the lens of suspicion. Neutral interactions become evidence supporting the narrative that was quietly introduced earlier. And without realizing it, the environment around you begins shifting in ways that are difficult to explain, but impossible to ignore. This is one of the reasons gossip can be so powerful within communities. Gossip rarely relies on outright lies. Instead, it thrives on partial truths arranged in misleading ways. A comment you made in a specific context may be repeated without that context. A decision you made for legitimate reasons may be described as selfish or arrogant. And because these stories circulate privately rather than publicly, the chosen one often has no opportunity to clarify what actually happened. By the time you hear about the rumor, it has already passed through several voices, each one adding their own interpretation along the way. The book of Proverbs warned about this long ago, describing the destructive influence of whispered accusations. A perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Proverbs 16:28. These words reveal something important about the nature of rumors. Their power lies not only in the information they spread, but in the division they create. Gossip quietly reshapes relationships. It changes how people interpret your actions before you even speak. And once that shift occurs, every new interaction is filtered through the narrative that was planted earlier. In many cases, collective opposition begins with a few individuals who feel particularly threatened by the presence of the chosen one. These individuals may not always recognize their own motivations. Sometimes the feeling begins as simple discomfort or insecurity. Perhaps your integrity makes them aware of their own compromises. Perhaps your influence within the community challenges their position or authority. Or perhaps the calling on your life creates a contrast that reminds them of the spiritual distance they feel within themselves. Instead of confronting these feelings honestly, they may begin framing the chosen one as a problem that needs to be addressed. This is where leadership within the opposition often emerges. Certain individuals take it upon themselves to guide the narrative, presenting their concerns as though they are acting on behalf of the group. They may claim they are protecting the community from division or defending shared values. On the surface, their actions appear responsible and even noble. But beneath that appearance lies a deeper motivation, controlling how others interpret the presence of the chosen one. By presenting themselves as protectors of the group, they gain influence over the conversation while directing suspicion toward you. Gradually, more people begin joining the narrative, often without realizing how little evidence actually supports it. Someone hears the story from a trusted friend and assumes it must be accurate. Another person repeats the same concerns because they do not want to appear naive or uninformed. Before long, the narrative gains momentum. Individuals who never had any personal conflict with you begin adopting the same perspective simply because it has become the dominant story circulating within the community. The power of group psychology begins reinforcing itself. When enough voices repeat the same assumption, it starts to feel like undeniable truth, even when it originated from speculation. Jesus himself spoke about this dynamic when he described the danger of false accusations spreading among people who do not verify what they hear. In the Gospel of Matthew, he warned his followers that such situations would arise, saying, "You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." Matthew 10:22. Notice the language again. Hated by many, not necessarily because of wrongdoing, but because of what your life represents. These moments reveal how quickly narratives can spread when groups choose suspicion over discernment. As time passes, the chosen one begins noticing the consequences of these whispers. Conversations become guarded. Invitations disappear. People who once treated you warmly now interact with caution or distance. The most painful part is often the confusion. You may sense that something has changed, yet no one speaks openly about what is wrong. The hostility remains indirect, expressed through subtle isolation rather than direct confrontation. This uncertainty can create deep emotional strain because you are trying to understand a conflict that no one will clearly acknowledge. Eventually, however, the whispers reach a tipping point. What began with a few individuals quietly shaping perceptions grows into something that appears far larger. The narrative has now traveled through so many conversations that it feels like a shared belief held by the entire community. At this stage, the chosen one may look around and wonder how so many people came to the same conclusion about them without ever asking for their perspective. The answer lies in the slow accumulation of assumptions that spread from one conversation to another until they formed what looked like collective agreement. Yet even in these moments, something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. While rumors spread quietly among people, God sees the entire process with complete clarity. Scripture reminds us that hidden motives and whispered accusations do not remain concealed forever. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus declared a powerful truth that chosen ones often remember during seasons of opposition. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Luke 12:2. These words reveal that the same secrecy used to build false narratives eventually becomes the reason those narratives collapse. For the chosen one, recognizing how collective opposition begins can be both painful and liberating. Painful because it reveals that many people formed opinions without knowing the full truth. Liberating because it helps you understand that the hostility you faced did not appear randomly. It followed a pattern that has repeated throughout history whenever truth disrupts comfortable systems. What started as whispers among a few individuals gradually expanded into a story embraced by many. But as we continue exploring this journey, you will begin to see that the very process used to turn the community against you also sets the stage for something unexpected. Because when rumors grow large enough, they eventually attract the attention of those who start questioning whether the story was ever true at all. Now, after everything we have explored together in this message, the final truth becomes impossible to ignore. The chosen one cannot be destroyed simply because a crowd decided they should be. History has shown this pattern too many times for it to be coincidence. Entire groups have united against individuals who carried truth, integrity, and divine purpose, believing that numbers alone would determine the outcome. Yet again and again, the same result appears. The crowd may shout louder, the accusations may spread faster, the isolation may feel overwhelming in the moment. But truth has a way of rising through the noise of human opinion, and when it finally surfaces, it exposes far more than the people who tried to bury it ever intended. If you have stayed with this message until now, take a moment to write the word faithful in the comments below, because the chosen ones who endure these seasons share one powerful trait. They remain faithful, even when the entire environment around them turns uncertain. The journey of the chosen one often includes moments where it feels as though many people have aligned themselves against you at the same time. Friends distance themselves, co-workers begin questioning your intentions, and even people who once supported you may hesitate to stand beside you publicly. In those moments, it is easy to assume that the crowd has already decided the outcome of your story. human nature tells us that the majority must be correct, that if enough voices repeat the same accusation, it must contain some truth. But spiritual history repeatedly demonstrates the opposite. Truth does not require the approval of a crowd to remain truth. In fact, many of the most powerful moments of vindication occur precisely when one person stands firm, while many others walk in the wrong direction. Scripture reminds us that divine purpose is never determined by human popularity. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul wrote words that continue echoing through the lives of chosen ones today. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. This statement was not a denial that opposition would exist. Paul himself faced rejection, persecution, and false accusations throughout his ministry. What he revealed instead was a deeper reality, that no amount of human opposition can override the plans God has already established. When divine purpose rests on someone's life, the attempts of others to silence or discredit them cannot permanently succeed. This is why so many stories throughout Scripture follow the same surprising arc. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers and thrown into a pit, yet he later rose to a position that saved entire nations from famine. David was hunted and rejected by those who feared the calling on his life, yet he eventually became king. Even Jesus himself faced crowds that mocked, rejected, and condemned him, believing they had permanently ended his influence. But the resurrection revealed the ultimate truth. What looked like defeat in the eyes of the crowd was actually the turning point of God's greater plan. These stories remind us that public opposition does not determine destiny. Divine purpose does. For the chosen one living through this kind of season, the experience can feel deeply personal and painful. When people unite against you, it can shake your confidence and make you question whether your path is truly guided by God. Yet these moments often become the very circumstances through which your strength is revealed. Endurance develops when you continue walking in truth, even while others misunderstand you. Integrity becomes visible when accusations are thrown at you and you refuse to respond with bitterness or revenge. Faith becomes real when you trust that God sees what others cannot see. The crowd may attempt to silence you. They may attempt to isolate you socially or spiritually. Some may even work deliberately to discredit your character so that others will doubt your intentions. But the deeper reality remains unchanged. Their plans operate within human limitations, while divine purpose operates on an entirely different level. Isaiah captured this reality when he declared, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." Isaiah 54:17. Notice that the verse does not say weapons will never form. It acknowledges that opposition will appear, but it also promises that those weapons will not ultimately succeed in accomplishing their intended purpose. What makes this promise so powerful is the way God often turns the very moment meant for your downfall into the stage where your true character becomes visible. When accusations collapse under their own contradictions, people begin asking questions they ignored before. When your integrity remains steady despite pressure, observers start recognizing the difference between truth and manipulation. And when time reveals the motives behind the hostility you faced, the same community that once believed the narrative may begin seeing the situation from an entirely different perspective. This is the divine reversal that many chosen ones eventually witness. The attempt to destroy your reputation becomes the event that reveals your integrity. The isolation meant to weaken you becomes the season that strengthens your relationship with God. The accusations meant to silence you become the evidence that exposes the motives of those who created them. What others intended as humiliation transforms into a moment of undeniable clarity, where truth stands visible for everyone to see. Psalm 37 describes this reversal with remarkable beauty. The Lord will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Psalm 37:6. Think about that image for a moment. Dawn begins quietly, almost unnoticed. But as the sun rises higher, it becomes impossible to hide the light. In the same way, vindication often begins slowly before becoming undeniable. What was once whispered in secret eventually stands illuminated in full view. And the chosen one who remained faithful during the darkest hours discovers that God was working behind the scenes the entire time. In the end, the story of the chosen one is never about defeating others. It is about remaining faithful to the identity God placed within you long before the crowd formed its opinions. True victory does not come from proving your enemies wrong or forcing others to acknowledge your worth. It comes from continuing to walk in integrity, humility, and faith, even when misunderstanding surrounds you. Because the power of the chosen one does not come from human approval. It comes from alignment with the purpose for which they were created. So if you are walking through a season where it feels like many voices are against you, remember this. The crowd does not hold the final authority over your story. The same God who called you is the one who will complete what he started. And when the moment of truth finally arrives, it will reveal something that no rumor, accusation, or collective opposition could ever erase. The chosen one rises not because they defeated the crowd, but because they refused to abandon the truth of who they were created to be.